Hi, I'm Sean. So this is more of a kind of a philosophy talk about sort of an experiment that I'm doing with my own life and like seeing things happening in some of my friends' lives. And so I thought I'd sort of put it together and then maybe some other people might find some interesting things they can take out of it and implement into their own lives. Or if not, it'll just be sort of weird and you can go like look at those crazy people. So I'm kind of a recovering collector. Like most of my life, I've been really obsessed with finding things, and I sort of dig in all this information about them and see how much I can sort of soak up about them while acquiring as much of them as possible. So I've collected. That's not my stuff. That's just a random picture. But I've collected like toys and records and T-shirts and artwork and all of this stuff. And it just, when you live in one place, it's really easy to sort of just keep piling this stuff up and collecting it. And a few years ago, I actually moved and moved all of it by hand and had to touch every single thing I owned. And I ended up trying to figure out, like, I have all this stuff and I don't really use much of it. Some of it, I never even use any of it. Come on, it seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, like, sometimes you get stuff and it's not so good, and so you're just like, well, I'm not going to take it back to the store because then I have to admit that I bought it in the first place. So I stick it in my closet. And so the stuff sort of just like piles up and keeps going. So we get it, and then we just sort of hold on to it. And then, you know, like we talk to our friends, like, oh, I got all this cool stuff. Man, my stuff's so awesome. But really, like, it's sort of just stuff that's sitting around that we're just charged with taking care of. You don't really get to enjoy it that much after you first buy it. Like, that's sort of the hurdle. You buy it, and then you're done. So it's sort of just like, you know, if your job is to take care of stuff that you have around your house, that's not really that awesome. And so people move it out of their houses. And so I found this number. Americans, $22 billion a year on storing stuff. And that's a lot. That works out to more than 2.5 square meters of storage space for every single person in the US. It's like adults, kids, everybody. That's just like the crap that they're not using. I couldn't find anything for Europe, but I'm sure it's just, you know, as mind-blowing. Thank you so much. So, yeah, like, we're spending our money on that, but what can we do, right? Like, when I was a toy collector especially, you know, I used to do that. The one who dies with the most toys wins, right? I repeated that a lot, but once I started getting rid of this stuff and thinking about how much I was spending on this and these collections, I sort of felt that was maybe not actually too correct. Yeah, it was actually kind of worthless, actually, for the most part. So I was like, well, what could I have done better? Like, right? Like, the amount of money that I had spent on stuff, if I had done other things, that probably would have been a better use of the time and resources. So when I say experiences, when I talk about, like, yeah, you could go places and see things and do stuff, but really it's like, do stuff that you're not expecting to do and that you're not comfortable with. So in the past couple of years, since I've been thinking about this, I've gone scuba diving, which I'm like late 30s. The idea of like boats and sharks are very, very scary to me. But I did it, and now, like, no matter what, that'll never not happen. I won't like undo scuba diving. I went on a zero gravity flight. Like, I got to float around. You know, like, that's not something I just like put in a box and put in a closet, and then it collects dust and I forget about it, and then somebody sells it at a yard sale, you know, sometimes later. Like, for the rest of my life, like, I was in zero gravity. You know, it's fucking crazy. So that's exciting, and that's sort of like what I was thinking. Like, maybe, you know, like, if stop spending money on stuff and start spending on doing things, that might make life a little bit better. You might get to enjoy it because it's not really that long. you only get a little while, and you might get to enjoy it a bit more. So we're kind of lucky because technology right now allows that to happen in ways that it never did before. You know, there's all this stuff like you can find out where your friends are, what your friends are doing, cool things that your friends are thinking about doing that maybe you never thought of trying out before. You can carry around like, every book you've ever bought in your pocket and read it. There's all these things. I'm sure you guys are familiar with most of this stuff. But one of these things I wanted to talk about a little bit more, just because it's not in Europe yet, but it will be soon. And it sort of ties into what I was talking about not buying crap, and that's neighbor goods. It's a site that my friend's working on, and it's sort of to enable sharing actual physical goods. Like how many people have a ladder or like a power drill or any of these things that they've bought, and they needed it for one thing, and it's sort of just sitting in their closet ever since then and never ever use it again. And then you have a friend who needs a ladder, and they buying their own ladder, and then they have to hold on to it forever. And so neighbor goods sort of lets you list all of the junk that you have that might be useful to somebody, and you don't want to get rid of it because maybe 3 years from now you need that drill again. But in the meantime, you can help your friends not have to go buy a drill. And so this helps you get rid of stuff, have less stuff, your friends have less stuff, and do more things with it. Like if you didn't have a drill, you couldn't drill things before, but now you can drill things without actually having a drill thanks to neighbor goods. So it's kind of cool, and I think there's more things that are sort of doing that. So we talked about this word, Technomads, which is sort of an interesting word, but whatever. This guy, Stephen K. Roberts, wrote this book, and he was the first person to use the word, as far as I can tell. And that was back in 1988, and which you can maybe see from there, but probably not. So this is 1988, right? So this guy built this bike and a computer on it so that he could drive around the country on a bicycle and stay like working on his computer. And like he was, think about what he was doing in '88, right? He's not watching YouTube. Like there's not a lot of connectivity in the world in '88, but he was psyched about it, and he wrote a book about what he was doing, and there were other people who were kind of into this idea, like being really mobile, and staying connected to stuff. So he's got this website, and started collecting other people who were doing this stuff. There's some other folks who have a boat, and now there's a larger community around it. They sort of refer to themselves as sort of technomads. These guys have an RV that they live in, and they drive all over the place. This guy's got a canoe, which, if that's awesome for you, then go for it. But for me, I would probably just stick my laptop in a canoe and then ride someplace and then get out. But if this one, you could keep typing while you're rowing, which, hey, it's online, right? So it's awesome. So that's not really my thing. Like I'm not too into like having a computer on my bike. But I am into traveling, and I am into going more places. And so this is from earlier this year. That's my wife and my kid and some dude on a train. And I've been, like I said, for the last few years, I've been traveling, doing all this stuff. But earlier this year, we sort of decided, like, let's see if we can jam all of this travel together and sort of like be homeless. Not really homeless, but like not have like a place that we lived and just go around and see what was up. So like we got one of those storage places I was talking about earlier. We put all of our junk in it, and then we went and we lived in Singapore for a month. We went and lived in Paris for 2 months. We just like traveled around. We went to Canada for a few months. All these places, and it was sort of it wasn't necessarily a sustainable thing. We just kind of had friends who were out of town and got to use their apartment for a month and did other things. And now we're back in Los Angeles, but traveling for the majority of the year, we learned a lot of things about what we actually need and what we want. And when we got back to LA and we're like, okay, we have our place, we have to go unpack our storage unit, we're like, I don't want any of this stuff anymore. Like I have no use for it. For 8 months, I lived perfectly fine without this piece of junk. I want to just leave it in this storage thing or throw it out or do whatever with it. And so I think sort of going around and doing stuff like that enabled us to figure out what was most important and what was more interesting for us. We tried to document it a little bit, but that got boring. So there's a podcast that starts off and we're like, oh, follow us all along on this thing. But we only did a couple of them. But you can check out how excited we were at the very beginning with this podcast. But the cool thing is, my son, he's like 9 months old now, and he's got a passport with more stamps on it than most adults I know. which I know you guys are all like, Americans, they don't have passports anyway. But, it's true. But it's also, like, America's a big, big place, right? And so while we were all over the place, like, there's people who can travel, that's actually to scale. So, like, you could travel all around Europe, and that's sort of just like one state. Or you go all over the US, and you could say that those people all have the same culture, but I think that they would very much disagree that they have the same culture. So we have this stuff, we can do it. You only get this one shot, right? So you can think about it, or you can just try to actually make a change. Well, it's more of a personal thing, like just me. But if any of that makes sense and it's cool, I started talking about this stuff online, and I found a whole bunch of other people who were sort of into the same thing. And so we have a little website, the Technomads.net, which just sort of collects links and stories about people who are doing kind of similar things. But we also have a mailing list, which is like about 400 people on right now, that are all very much into getting rid of their stuff, having less stuff, going places, and checking out the things that other people are doing, and living in more places and more areas. So check us out. Thanks.